the Sith, a people, an order, an empire. It has existed amongst the stars for as long as time, and for as long as time they have dreamt of the dream of an empire. For said empire, they have chosen many forms of government over the millennia, whether it has been through feudal states like the kingdom of Korriban, ruled under the iron grip of King Adas, up to Darth Sidious's galactic empire, which ruled as a semi-fascistic dictatorship, ruled by one man that kept it all together, and crumbled as soon as said man died. For millennia, Sith have dreamed of conquering the stars, conquering the galaxy, and for centuries they have tried and failed. That is mostly because of their lack of true, long, sustainable government. In this video today, I will discuss how Darth Killhoon solved the problems of the Sith Empire when fashioning his own. He fixed the troublesome nature of the Sith, rebranding it, reorganizing it, and making it a structure that can last for hundreds of generations. Thank you for joining us today in our continuation of the Sith Empire series. This is Darth Killhoon, and thank you for joining us in this epic quest to reform the Sith Empire. Darth Killhoon. He was raised in the time of the new Sith Empire, an empire equally divided as it was united. An empire that was devoid of its emperor, leaving in place the Dark Council, who ran the empire through fear, intimidation, and lackluster administrative control. This empire was crumbling. He saw it firsthand as he was sent to the front lines. He suffered at the hands of their decisions. He suffered at the hands of them. He viewed the Sith of his empire as incompetent, as fools who didn't care about anything but themselves. All but for one Sith, Darth Mar. He saw it as the only sustainable course for the Sith Empire, and when he died, and he was close to where he died, he felt the Force backlash as he was struck down in the throne room of the Eternal Emperor Zakul. At that point he knew that his Sith Empire was lost. For that, he tried to search for a solution. He wanted a better Sith Empire, one that he could mold, one that he could shape, but he didn't know how, so he looked at the Sith Empires of old and the Sith nations that came far before the new Sith Empire, the Empire of Darth Vitiate. So he began the look, and it all started on one planet, the planet that he was trained to be a Sith on, Korriban. Korriban, the Dust Bowl that Darth Killhoon was trained on. It was one of his first Imperial worlds that he was truly free upon, no longer a slave. It was the world he was trained on, and the world that he would first study its history of, and the first Sith nation to spawn out of it. Back then, most of the Sith were just wandering tribes and feudal states. Most of these feudal states had it out against each other. Most of them were ruled by powerful Sith lords, early Sith lords, masters of the ancient sorceries and dark side magics. But there was one Sith that stood out from the rest, one more powerful than the rest, one more skilled in battle than any other, one that could overpower the rest and unify them. This Sith, he went by the name of Adas. It was unknown of which kingdom he started from or which feudal state he started at, but he quick mustered an army, wielded 2 amazing battle axes, and went out to unite the Sith on Korriban, which was very, very successful. And around 24,000 years before the new Sith Empire was even established, King Adas's Kingdom of Korriban came to fruition under his authoritarian boots. King Adas ruled the Kingdom of Korriban for a pure century, keeping everything in line with his 2 battle axes, calling it the rule of the axe. But he came upon a challenge. This challenge came in the form of the Infinite Empire, the ancient Rakatans. They too were masters of the dark side, far more proficient than most Sith, and they wielded technology the Sith could only dream of. The fact that the Sith were still stuck in the Middle Ages, and the Infinite Empire was a spacefaring civilization. But the Sith, they did not submit as soon as the Rakatans landed on Korriban. King Adas stood his ground. He took up his axes once again and did battle, fighting the Rakatans inch from inch on the valley and sand-stricken desert world of Korriban. Eventually, after several years of deadly warfare, leading the Sith to ultimate victory and slaughtering every Rakatan that got in his way. But he would not live to see the end of the war, supposedly dying at the end of it. In the very last battle, maybe even the very last blow of the battle, he was struck down. The Sith soon devolved. The Kingdom of Korriban was shattered after a century of unification, and King Adas was no more. Darth Killhoon quick wrote off this empire, saying it could not last. It was bent on the rule of a single man, a man who did not have a clear heir, a man that did not make a line of succession or put a system forth that could ensure its long-lived stability, which Darth Killhoon loved stability. So he went on to the next Sith Empire, the empire that Darth Vitiate was initially from, but he was not emperor of, the old Sith Empire. Past the reign of King Adas, Sith civilization continued on, fractured and disunited, but continued on. They continued the honored traditions of murdering each other for power, seeking new and interesting ways to claim it. They sent armies after each other. They conquered the stars in their own names. But these Sith Lords never came together. They didn't come together for many, many thousands of years, until only a little more than 3.5 millennia ago in Darth Killhoon's time did the original Dark Jedi that split off from the Jedi Order landed on Korriban. These Dark Jedi found the Sith to be a very powerful race, a very wise race, but one that they found easy to conquer. And through these Dark Jedi, they united the Sith and dubbed themselves the Sith Empire, conquering many of the stars using the old Rakan technology along with the technology that they brought from the Jedi. It is thought that they were the first ones to truly unite the Sith. Of course, this is unknown if the Sith ever came together before that and then fractured up, but when the Dark Jedi found them, they united them and gave them a new name, the Sith Empire, as previously stated. Darth Killhoon, though, couldn't find many records. It was hard to find many records on these Dark Jedi. It's hard to figure out where they came from and what came before. They've heard tales and whispers of the 100-Year Darkness taking place, like some sort of civil war between the Jedi Order that led to the Dark Jedi's exile. but Darth Killhoon did not know for sure. He could not find the records. But he did know that this Sith Empire was actually able to last, because it functioned in a semi-elected monarchy system, where the most powerful Sith would nominate themselves for the Sith throne, oftentimes having to murder and kill their opponents to secure their position as head of the Sith Empire. This system continued on for 2,000 years, until, after the death of Marka Ragnos, there were two candidates for the Sith Emperor and Dark Lord of the Sith, Naga Sadow and Ludo Kresh. They battled outside the tomb of Marka Ragnos. Ludo Kresh, Naga Sadow trading blows with their Sith crystalline swords, lightning crackling, for Sith spells being muttered and instigated, buildings crumbling, valleys tearing each other apart. But eventually, Marka Ragnos, watching from the material plane, came forth and dubbed Naga Sadow the victor, proclaiming him to be his true heir. But this did not sit well with Ludo Kresh. Naga Sadow was satisfied, though. He learned of the Republic sitting just outside the Sith Empire's borders. He knew the military might of his Sith Empire and wanted to flex his muscles. He goaded the Republic into war, and he nearly won. That was until Ludo Kresh led an uprising that led to the Sith Civil War in the middle of the Great Hyperspace War with the Republic. This brought the downfall of the Sith Empire, destroying their military, their planets, their entire civilization. And it didn't take much for the Republic to mop up the rest, instigating the largest genocide in galactic history, annihilating the vast majority of the Sith purebloods and most of their followers, leaving a trail of hundreds of billions dead, and the conclusion of the old Sith Empire. A Sith Empire that their Emperor Darth Vitiate fled from and reconstituted his quote-unquote new Sith Empire. But Darth Killhoon also wrote this empire off. Might makes right does not necessarily determine a good leader, and that was the failure of the old Sith Empire in his mind. So he went on, and the next civilization was his own. Despite Darth Killhoon being trained and raised in the Sith Empire that he currently lives in, he knew very little of it, as he was just a slave for most of his early life. He did not receive a formal education in its history, in its teachings, and its civilization. So he scoured the archives, searching through them and picking out what he needed. He first began with the Sith landing on their now capital Droman Khas, a planet that he was very familiar with, a planet that he was practically raised on. He did not know how long the Sith Empire was, but he found out quickly. 1,300 years before his birth, the Sith Empire was formed, Darth Vitiate crowning himself Emperor of this new Sith Empire, and the survivors of the Great Hyperspace War to rebuild anew and to reform their shattered civilization. It was built around the ideals of nationalism and ultimate stability under the immortal Emperor of the Sith, Darth Vitiate, which still to his knowledge ruled to that very day, 1,300 years later. But it wasn't as authoritarian as the last two empires. The Emperor divided his powers amongst multiple Sith to ensure long-term stability, course, it wasn't the most stable because the Sith still had ambitions, but it worked for a while, with the Emperor's clear guidance, of course. After the conquering of Drovan Kaz, the formation of the Imperial military, the Dark Council was formed. 12 members of the Sith, at least to his knowledge. There may be more, there may be less. He did not know. He just knew that there was a lot of them, each one occupying a certain part of Imperial government, whether that was logistics, military, defense, diplomacy, philosophy, the arts, and other aspects of Imperial civilization. They governed. One Sith for one sphere. He found this to be very stabilizing. The Sith were very nationalistic people, very nationalistic government, able to stay together for this long, and able to stay unified against their ultimate enemy, the Jedi, which he loathed for their stupidity and ignorance. But of course he saw flaws in this system. Sith were allowed to get away with murder. They sent entire armies against each other for political gain. They had entire rivalries and wasted resources on petty conflicts between each other when they could have unified to fight the Jedi off. He saw so many flaws. He hated the system. He wanted a truly unified Sith, not just a Sith unified in hate of a common foe of the Republic and Jedi. He wanted one that could last beyond the wars, beyond the conflicts, beyond the hate, and beyond their petty greed. So he turned his sights. He couldn't find any more empires. Only empire that he could find was Darth Revan's. But you know what? That was exactly the same as the one he's in now. Couldn't understand why he was put in this position, why no Sith could ever create a truly well-rounded government, and a government that would genuinely work. So he decided to live with it. But when he was assigned to go explore the unknown regions, and when he received word that the Sith Empire had fallen, although it didn't, he later found out, he went around building his new empire. Of course, he wasn't the Emperor. Another Sith had come to take in that position, Darth Nax. But after 3 civil wars, he usurped Darth Nax and started his plans for his own Sith Empire, his own vision, his own guide, to bring long-lasting stability to an empire of greedy thugs. For years, Darth Killhoon has been one of the most odd Sith Lords to ever walk out of the Sith Academy, where he did not view himself superior to anybody. He was quite humble. His humbleness gave him a strength that other Sith did not get. He viewed people as equals. He did not view them as slaves or beneath them as cockroaches. Unlike his other Sith Lords, he actually valued human life and other people that couldn't use the Force. He valued everyone, which is why he went out to create Bill of Rights for his citizenry, because he viewed them as being more important than just cannon fodder, along with defining the rest of the system to give them a voice in the Sith Empire, because they were more important, the Sith. They were the backbone of the Empire, the non-Force users, the non-represented, the soldiers, the factory workers, the farmers. They were more important than the Sith. He realized that. So, he went about crafting his Bill of Rights and a constitution, the first Sith constitution ever in existence. And he did it very tactfully and very methodically and very thoughtfully, taking everyone's perspective into account to protect everyone and every citizen of his empire, no matter who they were, how high or low they were, Sith or not. They were all important to him, and they all mattered. Darth Killhoon went out of his way to make his Bill of Rights. He looked at the Republic and saw their rights, and decided he could actually do better. So the first article of his Constitution was dubbed the Bill of Rights. And he started with the First Amendment. The First Amendment reads as follows in his "O divine words." The rights of the citizen to practice free discord, freedom of art, right to peaceful assembly, and freedom of press that wouldn't speak ill of the empire as a whole or his royal family. Criticism of the government is allowed as long as it does not subvert the idea of the empire. All speak in support of a different nation over our own is forbidden. The press cannot push political agendas or falsely report corrupted information. This bill, this amendment, was there to protect the citizenry in free speech and free press-ish. He also wanted the people to support the empire and wouldn't allow dissenting speech, as he called it. But he did it so most people could speak their mind whenever and however they wanted to, as long as it did not sow discord of negative effect to the rest of the empire. The Second Amendment. For the defense of a free empire, the right for the citizen to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Darth Killhoon had seen 3 civil wars in the span of 7 years in his Sith Empire. The third one is the one that he instigated to put an end to all the madness. But he realized that the average citizen was being abused during all 3 civil wars by all sides. So he decided to give his people the right to defend themselves against both the Empire and foreign invaders. So he gave them the right to keep and bear arms of all types, from slug throwers, blasters, lightsabers, vibra blades, etc. All were free game in his mind. The Third Amendment. Police and military cannot search or seize a person's property without warrant ratified by a local judge. He believed in law, order, and justice, and he did not want citizens or other Sith to be harassed for mere suspicion. So he created a safe measure, so that way military and police will not be able to just barge into people's homes and seize their property without consent. The Fourth Amendment. The right to worship our God, the united force in our holy Sithari religion, shall not be infringed. No other deity or pantheon is allowed to be worshipped. This amendment protects the religious rights of men within the empire, but only religious rights to serve their deity, which he prophesied was the united force as a whole, both light and dark, was a god, and the force abilities that the Sith and Jedi possessed were blessings from said god, or just channeling that god's energy, as he so claimed. And he wanted a one-state religion to keep stability for the entire populace. They'd all be unified under a religion. The Fifth Amendment. The right of an individual shall not be forced to answer in a court of law for a crime, except in case of harassing in the land or naval forces or in the militia. When in actual service in times of war or public danger, nor shall any be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, and prosperity without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. He saw the tyranny of the Sith of old, how they would just drag people out of homes without a trial, without fair justice, without a criminal prosecution. They would just be accused of crimes and immediately taken off. He wanted a court of law to make sure that these cases would not happen and justice would actually be served instead of just serving out their own ends. The Sixth Amendment. In any criminal prosecution, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and private trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of in conclusion and the confliction with the witness against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witness in his favor, and have an assistance of counsel for his defense. This amendment guarantees the right to a court, a private court, of any type for any crime. They must be told of said crimes that they are convicted of, and they are allowed to have a lawyer, in other words. So that way, due process can be maintained, and people who are innocent can go free if they are found to be. The Seventh Amendment. There's an individual right, not in the Constitution, that can be added with a 3/4 majority vote of the Imperial Diet and Sith Assembly, along with approval from the Imperial Court. The only rights that will never be allowed is rights that violate another citizen's rights. Any right that goes against the family unit is also forbidden. This ensures that in case he missed any proper rights of his citizens, that the Congress can approve to add rights to the Constitution, but it needs a 3/4 majority vote from both houses. That Darth Killhoon will explain later. The Eighth Amendment. Every citizen, soldier, and Sith has a right and duty to execute every non-humanoid alien, Jedi, Republic dog, and pro-Republic scum on sight. No mercy and quarter for these plagues is allowed. The sacred divide force has enacted we must be in its sword in the material realm. He created a religious dogma to ensure the stability of his empire, and for that, the Republic must burn the secular empire of the galaxy, the Jedi and non-humanoid aliens. So, he gave his citizens the rights to execute every single Jedi and Sith and non-supporter of the Empire that they come across. The Ninth Amendment. It is the duty of the people, the government, the military, the Sith, and His Holy Majesty the Emperor to further the progress of imperial improvement. Internal strife is strictly forbidden. The military has full authority to put down anyone who rebels against the Empire as a whole. Rebellions, civil wars, power struggles are strictly forbidden under this amendment, as it endangers the Empire and the citizenry of said Empire, and brings disunity and disloyalty to the Empire. The 10th Amendment. Every citizen has a right to both primary and secondary education. Every child must go to both primary and secondary school. Human and humanoid aliens, immigrants must pass a secondary school level test before being allowed into the Empire. The 11th Amendment. Every man and woman that are human or near humanoid age 21 has the right to cast their vote in government procedure at the ballot box. Darth Killhoon did not like democracy. He did not trust it, but he gave his citizens the right to vote. And I shall explain how said government will work and how it functions. It is very limited, it is very small, but the people, nonetheless, shall take part in it. Darth Killhoon, in his studies of the many leaders of the Sith, the many Sith Emperors, he realized that all of them had many fatal flaws, but all of them shared one fatal flaw that led to the downfall of all their Sith empires and all their Sith states. It was the fact that their entire empires revolved around them and their selfish ambitions. So, he knew that he couldn't leave the Emperor's position to be totally infallible, totally powerful in its exercising and its wield of strength. So, he decided to limit even his own power as Emperor. In the second article in his constitution, he detailed the powers of the executive branch of the government, the powers of the Emperor. The executive branch of the government is the monarchy of both the feudal and state levels, but he primarily concerned himself with organizing it of the federal level, or the throne, his throne. The Sith Empire he designed had multiple monarchies. Each one would be the head of their own state, but for different states among the Empire. The monarch, whether it's the Emperor, a king, duke, prince, or count, is the head, and the Emperor is head of the Empire as a whole. Their powers, though, isn't to make laws, it is to enforce them, lead the armed forces, and determine and administer both foreign relations and the daily needs of their state. The Emperor is a king of the entire planet Nova Sanitium, the throne world, and the Emperor of the Sith Empire, along with the religious head of the Sith-Tari religion. The Emperor is Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, with the Armed Forces fully at his disposal and his command. The Emperor has the power invested in himself to disband the Sith Assembly and Imperial Diet, or the legislative branch, in times of war, and their duties are transferred to his executive branch until the war is over. Then elections must be held to reform said legislative branch. In times of peace, the Emperor can disband the Sith Assembly and Imperial Diet in times of peace with a majority of Imperial judicial-level judges support the Emperor's move on the legislative branch. The legislative branch is disbanded, elections must be held in one standard year. The Emperor is solely responsible for foreign affairs and setting foreign policy. The only alliance that Darth Killhoon specifically outlined that cannot be broken is the Treaty of Kassil, an economic and military alliance between the Sith Empire of Darth Killhoon and the Chiss Ascendancy. This alliance is to secure the area known to the rest of the galaxy as the Unknown Regions from outside aggression from both the known and unknown galaxy as a whole. The economic alliance is for free trade between both nations, and all trade from the Sith Empire is free to pass through the Chiss Ascendancy to the rest of the galaxy, so to keep the Sith Empire as secretive to the galaxy as possible. The Sith Emperor also has the power to wield his power, and wield it justly and fairly. Darth Killhoon knew that limiting his power and making himself responsible to the Sith Empire will set a precedent for future emperors to follow in the same, and for the rest of the government to hold the emperor accountable if he proves unlawful and unjust, setting the key example of what a Sith should be, responsible to his people. This third article of the Constitution is the legislative branch. Darth Killhoon loved the idea of a legislative branch, a body to keep the Emperor and the government in line, to keep Sith from constantly making laws and new legislation on their own, to make them responsible to the people, despite him actually having a very disdain for the parasite, which is democracy, upon Sith civilization. In fact, this was a very radical step for Darth Killhoon. He opened the floodgates of democracy into a civilization that previously rejected it. That's why he also limited it. When he created his legislative branch, he didn't want to deal with the bureaucracy that was created with the Republic's version of democracy. He did not want the power struggles that kept the Dark Council behind, the old legislative branch. And he didn't want to create divisions between the Sith and the average citizen. But he also knew that the Sith were good on their own and were very wise, unlike the average citizen. So he decided to divide the legislative branch into two different houses, an upper and lower house. The Imperial Diet and the Sith Assembly. The Imperial Diet is the only democratic one of the two houses. This house is drawn of representatives voted in through a two-voting system. The elections are held every 6 years in the Sith Empire, and the ballot has two sides on it. One side is for your local district representative, and districts are about roughly 1 million people at the time of the legislative branch's founding, so districts change border depending on population growth and decline. You pick from a number of candidates, and then the two highest voted ones you will vote on again, and the one candidate that gets the most votes shall take the seat, unless from the list of candidates one gets 51%, then he becomes the de facto winner. The second vote on your ballot is for you to cast a vote for a particular political party, recognized by the Emperor as a legitimate political party, able to be voted for. There is no fixed numbers of seats in the Imperial Diet, but as the population increased, so do district sizes. Population requirements so to try to manage the number of seats. Under the reign of Emperor von Killhoon, it was 1 million, but by the time of the destruction of the first Death Star, district requirements had been lifted to 20 million. But for how many representatives are elected, there's an equal amount that are not directly elected, which is tied to the second vote on the ballot box, which you vote for a particular political party within the empire. And then the percentages of party votes is divided amongst the parties. Say the Conservative Party got 15% of the votes, they get 15% of the seats. And that's the general rule of thumb. And the number of non-directly elected seats is always equal to the number of directly elected seats. This allows for a diverse thinking between multiple ideologies in the Imperial Diet, and for the need of local districts to be addressed to and given a voice. The Imperial Army and Navy also get a few seats set aside for them. The Imperial Army is given the equivalent of 3% of the total seats of the Imperial Diet added onto the members.
The Imperial Navy also gets 3% of the seats. This doesn't mean that the military are 6% of the seats and 94% are civilian. It is more like 100% of the seats are civilian, and the military adds 6% more, totaling it to 106% of seats when it is finished. Then of course they adjust the numbers around to make it 100% to look good on paper and all. Or data pads in this case. Records can be taken on both. Most of these military seats are made up of a multitude of officers from lieutenant to general, ensign to admiral, all having served in various roles like logistics, infantry, armor, artillery, transportation, administration, intelligence, navigation, and so on, in the hundreds of jobs that the Imperial military requires. Also, while they are voting in the chambers, they are all put together, their seats in the farthest corner of the body. Also, while they are in the Imperial Diet chamber, rank means nothing for that time, so a general cannot force a major to vote a certain way. If it is found to be the case, said senior officer would be hauled off to prison and court-martialed. These military officers would oftentimes band together anyway, though, and make some sort of a military interest party within the Imperial Diet. Also, all representatives in the Imperial Diet have to be military veterans, as Darth Killhoon respected veterans the most, and expected most male citizens to be veterans. So that way they can maintain their militarized society. So you don't typically see many anti-military legislators within the government. And this system but then there's also another facet of the Imperial Diet. There is something called the Imperial Chancellor. Darth Killhoon loathed the Republic and hated its system, which is why he wanted to insult them as much as possible when he formed his semi-democratic empire. He decided to take the title of Chancellor from the Republic to be his head of government as well, calling it instead the Imperial Chancellor. The Imperial Chancellor is voted in by coalition building. For these people who don't understand what a coalition government is, it is when multiple parties come together in an alliance for a common goal to take charge of the parliament. After the coming together of a multitude of parties to unite, it is a majority of the representatives in the Imperial Diet. The Imperial Chancellor is the party leader of the largest party in a coalition of multiple parties. And his assistant, the Vice Imperial Chancellor, is typically the leader of the second largest party in the coalition. But what is the duty of the Imperial Diet? The Imperial Diet is to vote on legislative for civil laws, fund infrastructure and development projects, tax policy, and budgeting government expenses. That is all, no more, no less. The Imperial Chancellor's job is to make sure all these issues make it to the voting floor and keep things running through procedure meant to keep things going fast without delay as they are running an interstellar empire. Legislation is taken to the fore under only 4 conditions. The first is that the Emperor himself puts a bill up for voting, but the representatives won't be alerted of the Emperor put the bill up. He will remain completely anonymous to keep the vote honest. The second condition is if 10% of the total representatives put a bill up for voting. The third is if the Imperial Chancellor or Vice Imperial Chancellor puts a bill up for voting, no matter what. There is something. The last condition is if the Imperial Chancellor or Vice Imperial Chancellor approves a bill to be voted on that had been drawn up by a representative. There is no committees, no subcommittees to get in the way of law. The only time that a bill will ever be allowed to even be considered is if there is a law in place that does the same to avoid confusion. If there is already a law that covers that, said bill will be shot down immediately. The next duty is determining funding. Once a year, taxes are collected and added up. Then it is the duty of the Imperial Diet to figure out how to spend it under some conditions. The military must never have less than 20% of the budget. Law enforcement must have 10%, half a percent set aside for the royal family, and then there must always be a 2.5% of tax revenue set aside to not be spent, instead meant to be a relief fund in case of absolute emergency. The Imperial Chancellor, his advisors, and many expert accountants will draft up a budget for the year. Then it is sent to the floor to be voted on. If the budget fails to pass the Imperial Diet, they will take an inquiry from representatives who disagreed and make adjustments until they can get a majority vote. If they cannot reach a majority vote, then the Emperor will step in until they can figure out a budget that works for everyone.
Darth Killhoon, though, did not want to leave the government solely at the behest of democratically elected politicians. So he created a second house of legislative body, a second house that must ratify and approve the bills of the first house, a house that is not made up of politicians, but one made up of his own kind, the Sith. So, the upper house of the legislative body, he called it the Sith Assembly. It is an evolution of the Dark Council in his mind, of his new Sith Empire. Like the Dark Council, it is a legislative body made up of a non-elected group of Sith that acted kind of like the Republic Senate, how some of their members were not elected in his mind, but where most of them would just be appointed by their local representatives or their local government. And this would be the counterbalance to balance out the democratic elements of the Imperial Diet. In the case of the Sith Assembly, though, each state gets 3 Sith Lords chosen by the head Sith monarch of their county, duchy, grand duchy, principality, or kingdom to represent the interests of their provinces within the empire, but with the Sith perspective to it. As oftentimes Sith are far wiser than the average citizen and have more weight on their shoulders than a politician with far more responsibility. The reason that every province get the same number of votes in the Sith Assembly is to prevent large provinces from dominating over the small ones politically. The Sith Assembly gives voice to the needs of their land with equal representation. That is why the Sith noble who runs the province will appoint 3 Sith to go to the capital, and the said Sith must be from the provinces too. Oftentimes you see Sith princes and princesses of the Sith noble being sent if they are of age and completed their military service. If that isn't the case, then extended Sith family or of another Sith Lord living in the province. This body's duty is to evaluate the legislation sent to them by the Imperial Diet, evaluate it from a Sith perspective, and vote on it. If it passes with a majority, then the bill or budget gets sent to the Emperor to get signed into law or vetoed. Quickly, if it's vetoed, then
The Imperial Diet and Sith Assembly vote on it again. If they get a two-thirds majority vote in both houses to approve it, then it passes with or without the Emperor's signature. Just so that way the Emperor cannot just veto everything that comes across his desk just for spite against the Imperial Diet and Sith Assembly. The Sith Assembly's job is to rarely propose bills, but if they do, the bills need to go to the office of the Crown Prince/Princess, or the Sith Assembly Regent. Normally the Crown Prince or Princess of the Sith Empire is head of the Sith Assembly, similar to the Imperial Chancellor, but more just for the Sith Assembly to work faster. If you don't know what a Crown Prince or Princess is, it is a prince or princess that is next in line to the throne, and is usually the firstborn unless the Emperor chooses another prince or princess to be their heir. They enforce fast procedure and voting on bills and budgets, but this office is more of a classroom for the heir of the throne, as this is a lesson from the Emperor on how to properly rule and listen to others without lashing out, acting as a true leader of the empire of laws and tradition, preparing them for their position as emperor later down the line. But in the case of the heir isn't of the age, serving in the armed forces, then the Sith Assembly will get a Sith Assembly Regent, or simply known as the Regent. This Regent is appointed by the Emperor to serve in his child's place, and is normally a sibling or close relative of the Emperor, but can be any Sith Lord in reality of the Emperor. And they had to serve at least 6 years of minimum military service and have at least 2 children under their belt. The Regent is given the Sith religious title of Darth immediately on appointment if they had already not earned it, and served as the Sith Assembly Regent until his life or the Emperor's life expires. Their position is tied directly to the Crown Prince or Princess, because they are just the guy who steps in their position when they are busy or cannot watch over the Sith Assembly. Once they become Emperor or Empress, they lose their position, no matter what. The Crown Prince or Princess or Sith Assembly Regent are solely responsible for putting forth Sith legislation of only legislation that concerns Sith affairs. This includes funding for Sith training, Sith education, regulation of Sith life, etc. Sith legislation needs a supermajority of 60% of the vote to get passed, but doesn't need to be sent to the Imperial Diet to be approved. The Emperor and the Sith Holy Court both need to approve of the legislation to make it into law, so the Sith Assembly, for the most part, has a pretty easy compared to the Imperial Diet. Darth Killhoon made this so the Sith wouldn't be making any massive sweeping changes that would nullify the civilian voice, while not giving a whole lot of power to said civilian populace. Finally, the last branch of the Imperial government. A branch that has never truly existed in any Sith Empire, or at least it has never had equal power with the others. The Judiciary Branch. It is covered in the 4th article of the Imperial Constitution drafted up by Darth Killhoon. The judiciary system of the Sith Empire of Darth Killhoon is his final check and balance on all the other branches of the government, holding no policy-making powers, only there to enforce the Constitution and protect the citizens from their rights being infringed by the other 2 branches. Like this legislative branch, it is divided into 2 courts, but they are not conjoined. They serve the same purpose, but just for 2 different types of people. The first court is the Imperial High Court. These are 11 constitutional judges appointed by the Imperial Diet for life to ensure the Constitution laws are enforced and never go against the rights of the individual citizen against any other non-force user. And these judges also conduct trials for non-force user traitors and people who actively tried to bring harm to the Empire. These judges need to be voted in with a 2/3 majority vote of the Imperial Diet, serving as lower judge well versed in law and true believers in the Sith faith, the Emperor, the Force Undivided, and the Constitution. Once they are voted in, they serve for life until death, a terminal illness or mental illness like Alzheimer's sets in. Then they must step down and their seat will be filled by another judge, always having 11, so there can never be gridlock if they need to vote on anything. Also, if any cases where the Constitution needs proper interpretation, where it might be a little vague, then the Imperial High Court will have to evaluate the case in hand and handle how it relates to the Constitution and renders their judgment on how the Constitution should be interpreted. Then, there's one final chore devoted to the Imperial High Court, a check on the Emperor. If in a time of peace, the Emperor has the power to disband both legislative houses temporarily, but the Imperial Diet can only be disbanded with the blessing of the majority of the judges of the Imperial High Court. If they do not approve, because they don't see the Imperial Diet's actions at the time needing warrant for disbanding, they can halt the Emperor's wishes. As I said earlier, there are 2 courts, and there is one for normal citizens, but not for Sith. Though there is a second court, and the second court is nearly as important as the first. In the second court of the Judiciary Branch, one not meant for ordinary men, one meant for individuals who have been elevated above the average being. This court is to enforce the laws of the Sith. This is the Sith Holy Court. The name is meant to explain the entire purpose of it. All the judges are Sith, except experts in law and in Sithari theology, but in the Prophet Emperor Darth Killhoon's original words. These men serve on the court for life, being appointed by a 2/3 majority vote from the Sith Assembly, with 11 judges at all times, similar to the Imperial High Court. These men and women are all given the title of Darth on their ascension, as they take a seat on a more theocratic court. Like a light-handed inquisition is the best way to interpret it. If there is a case of a Sith committing a crime due to them being so limited in numbers, they can be sent to the Sith Holy Court for trial of everything from petty burglary to rape and murder, passing judgment accordingly upon their actions. They are experts on the Constitution, but they rarely are charged with interpreting it, leaving that to the Imperial High Court. Instead, they take a more religious judgment. They have the power to search for force cults that focus on only the light or dark, foreign religions, and people who attempt to change the words of the Prophet Emperor Darth Killhoon I. In fact, it is common knowledge that the current reigning Emperor-Empress, along with the Sith Holy Court, have a holocron made by Darth Killhoon I to guide future generations if they have trouble interpreting his words. He designed it, though, that only direct descendants of his line can open it, so if a random Sith or Jedi stole it, it'd be completely worthless. Also, it is good in proving that the that the current Emperor and Empress is of the same line as the original Darth Killhoon, and of not someone else's line. So if a case comes up where a Sith has a question about the Sith-Tari religion that they don't have a clear answer for, they will consent the current reigning Emperor and the holocron. Then for the final task of the Sith Holy Court, as with the Imperial High Court, is being able to protect the Sith Assembly from being disbanded in peacetime by the Emperor or Empress. And in times of war, though, the court cannot protect either legislative body from disbanding, but as said, either elections must be held later to find replacements and reform the Imperial Diet and Sith Assembly within 1 standard year of disbanding. In that case, the court would temporarily take over the duties of the legislating branch, but both courts would come together in that case to vote, with the Emperor also acting as a legislator in the rare condition that it would be needed for the legislative branch of the government to be disbanded. The Constitution goes on further to limit the powers of any forms of bureaucracy, explain the duties and autonomy of the military, and standards for education, further privileges, and social life of imperial citizens. But those are trivial, and we had already been going for quite a long time. We have covered the 3 branches of the government and the overview of their powers. Now is only the federal level government. The local and province governments of each on the different plans of the empire have exactly the same systems, just copy, paste, and put down for smaller size organizations, and with far less power than the federal. As this empire is very centralized in policy making, most policy does come from Novus Initium and the Parliament and the Emperor, but has the ability to become a decentralized government if needed, but rarely so will that ever happen. So that will be it for today, guys. Thank you for staying this long in Darth Killhoon's explanation of the Sith Empire's government. We still have more videos to get to. I will be doing a video on the Sith-Tari religion that you have been hearing about in this video, as it is a very important concept to the Empire. And Darth Killhoon's evolution of the Sith Order is the Sith-Tari. It is a new form of the Sith Order that will take all its best elements and improve them for far exceed the last. But that is for another video. Please hit that like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to keep up with your favorite Sith Lord. Have a good night, guys, and may the Force be with you always.